What happens when the man who forces you into marriage turns out to be your lifelong secret love? Join us as we explore how an icy business arrangement transformed into an extraordinary tale of unexpected romance. Before we dive in, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. You won't want to miss these stories that capture hearts and inspire souls. Every bride dreams of her wedding day being magical and perfect. Unfortunately, I can't make that claim. The ceremony wasn't the fairy tale I'd imagined as a child. No flowing white lace or garden blooming with flowers. Instead, it took place on the 56th floor of Sterling Tower, high above New York's bustling streets. A crystal sanctuary suspended in the sky, sterile and emotionless. The heavy aroma of sandalwood permeated the space, thick and overwhelming, wrapping around my neck like phantom fingers. There I stood in a dress chosen by someone else, beside a stranger named Ethan Sterling. He remained motionless like carved marble, towering next to me in his perfectly tailored black suit, never once meeting my gaze. His features were razor sharp, his expression blank as granite. Power radiated from every inch of him, distant, immovable authority, and there was me, a delicate sacrifice placed before his altar. My hands shook as I gripped the small bouquet of lilies, selected by his assistant. Not me. I struggled to control my breathing while the enormity of the moment crushed down on my chest. This wasn't a love story or a dream come true. This was currency a daughter offered up to settle her father's debts. I could still hear my father's trembling voice from earlier that morning, his unsteady hand holding mine in our cramped apartment. Please, Elizabeth. I never intended for things to reach this point, but we'll lose it all. Your mother's home, her legacy. I have nothing else to offer except you. You, as if I were nothing more than a bargaining chip. I had whispered a single question, though. The answer was already clear. What about my wishes? He had collapsed in tears. And like always, I buried my own dreams to save the family that had already suffered so much loss. The priest's words dragged me back to reality, his voice bouncing off the glass walls like a cruel echo. Do you, Elizabeth Monroe, take Ethan Sterling? Everything else became a blur. I stared at my reflection in the glass. I couldn't recognize the woman looking back. Her hair pulled back too severely, her lips painted in a shade too bold for someone desperately trying to vanish. I looked down at the delicate silver band on my finger, the same ring my mother had worn before sickness claimed her. I remembered that night she placed it in my palm. We sat in our tiny kitchen, only the old refrigerator's hum breaking the silence. She had pressed the cool metal into my hand and whispered with her weak but determined voice, "Promise me you'll never lose who you truly are, no matter what life takes away." I had made that promise. But standing there, I questioned whether I'd honored it, not when I had just whispered, "I do," to a man who wouldn't even look at me. Ethan's response was barely audible as he repeated the vow, "I do." It sounded more like closing a business deal than making a commitment. My throat burned, but I kept my head high as the priest pronounced us married. No celebration, no applause, just the distant city hum beyond the glass and the hollow pain expanding in my chest. Ethan extended his arm, and I accepted it because what choice did I have? I dared to glance up at him, searching for any emotion in his eyes, but they remained blank, cold, as if I were just another transaction completed. Another conquest claimed dot when the elevator doors closed. I expected him to take me to the Sterling mansion. That's what wives do, right? Go home, play their role, pretend. But when the elevator stopped at the 56th floor again, confusion twisted in my stomach. "This isn't," I began. "My office," he interrupted, his voice low and emotionless. "We have unfinished business." Bewilderment churned in my gut as he led me through the towering glass entrance. The air felt sharper here, leather, coffee, and something else I couldn't identify. Control, perhaps. He didn't offer me a seat. He didn't even turn around as he walked to the enormous black desk commanding the room. My legs felt like lead, but I followed, gripping my gown with trembling hands. I had never entered his domain before. I didn't belong in this place. Then, as I stood frozen in the heart of his empire, my fingers found something hidden in my dress's seam. I pulled it out, my heart skipping. A letter. The paper was aged, creased from being concealed too. Long. My mother's familiar handwriting stared back at me. Forgive me, my precious daughter. There are secrets I couldn't bear to share, ... I didn't get to read more. Ethan turned then, leaning against the desk, his eyes finally meeting mine for the first time that day. Something flickered there, something I couldn't decipher, and suddenly the letter in my hand felt heavier than the ring on my finger. What had my mother kept from me? And why did I sense that Ethan already knew? I swallowed hard, pressing the letter against my chest as Ethan's voice cut through the silence once more. Close the door, Elizabeth. This marriage is far from finished. I hesitated. The door behind me seemed like a threshold I was too frightened to cross. His words hung in the air, low and unreadable. Elizabeth, Ethan said again, slower this time, quieter but not gentler. I turned, my heart in my throat, and pushed the glass door shut. The soft click resonated through the vast office like a final judgment. I stood there momentarily, my hand shaking on the handle before forcing myself to face him again. Ethan hadn't moved. He leaned against the desk as if he had all the time in the world, arms folded across his chest, watching me with unsettling patience. The city lights behind him cast him in shadows, like a portrait of authority, untouched by the chaos raging inside me. Come here, he said simply. My legs resisted at first. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced one foot forward, then another, until the desk's edge pressed against my thighs, the cool glass sending shivers through my gown's thin fabric. Ethan remained silent. He didn't reach for me. He simply waited. I glanced down at the letter clutched in my white-knuckled grip. What is this? I whispered, my voice barely carrying in the cavernous room. He looked at the paper, recognition flashing in his eyes for just a moment before his expression closed off again. Something you're not prepared to read, he replied. I stiffened. Don't tell me what I'm prepared for. He leaned in slightly, his gaze dropping to my lips before returning to my eyes. Then tell me, Elizabeth, are you prepared for this marriage? Prepared for me? The air between us grew thick, tightening with every breath. I despised how my body betrayed me, how warmth spread through my chest, how my pulse quickened under his stare. I wanted to lie, to tell him I wasn't afraid, that I didn't care. But the words stuck in my throat, tangled in truths I wasn't brave enough to face. He straightened, pushing off the desk, towering over me. His hand rose slowly and deliberately, brushing a strand of hair from my cheek. I flinched instinctively, and something dark crossed his face. Not anger, something else. Almost like disappointment. This isn't what I wanted, I whispered. I never asked for this. His jaw tightened, his hand hovering momentarily before dropping to his side. You think I did? The words hit harder than expected. I stared at him, searching for something, anything to hold on to. Then why? Why force me into this? Ethan stepped closer. His warmth surrounded me, filling the space between us until I could barely breathe. Because your father made his choice, he murmured. And so did you. I felt tears prickling at my eyes. That wasn't a choice. That was sacrifice. He leaned in, his lips brushing my ear, his breath warm and unsteady. Then stop acting like you're helpless. My breath caught. He was right. I had surrendered without fighting. I had stood at that altar and whispered, I do when every fiber of my being wanted to scream. But standing here in this room, with his voice seeping into my skin like wildfire, I wasn't sure I had the strength to pull away anymore. "Tell me to stop," Ethan whispered, his hand trailing down my arm, ghosting over my waist. "Tell me to let you go." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, my fingers released the letter, letting it flutter to the floor like it meant nothing at all, because in that moment, it didn't. I wasn't thinking about family secrets or betrayal or duty or honor. I was thinking about how his touch burned through my dress's silk, about how his voice made me forget who I was supposed to be. My silence was answer enough. With a sharp breath, he turned me gently but firmly, guiding me back until my knees hit the desk. His hand slid to my waist, lifting me effortlessly onto the cold glass surface. I gasped softly as the chill seeped through the fabric, anchoring me in the reality I was about to surrender to. Ethan stood between my knees, his hands braced on either side of me, trapping me without touching me. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice like smoke curling around my resolve. I did. And for the first time since we met, I truly saw him, not the billionaire, not the enemy, not the man who held my future in his hands, but the man who was just as lost as I was, his forehead pressed gently against mine, his breath catching like he was struggling to maintain control. "I don't want to hurt you," he whispered, the words so raw they nearly broke me. I reached up, my fingers trembling as they traced his jaw, following the sharp lines I had once thought were carved from stone. "Then don't," I whispered back, and just like that, the barrier between us shattered. He claimed me there on that desk, not as a conqueror, but as a man who had been waiting for something he couldn't name, and I let him, because for the first time since entering this gilded cage, I wakened alone. The city outside remained wrapped in early morning gray, but his warmth had long since vanished. The glass walls of his office stood silent, lights dimmed as if the previous night had never occurred. I sat up slowly, pulling the thin shawl tighter around my shoulders. My wedding dress lay crumpled near the desk like discarded skin. I pressed my palm against the glass surface beneath me, the cold biting my skin. Reality settled like heavy fog. I was married, yet somehow I had never felt more alone. The silence weighed heavier than any vow we had exchanged. I slid off the desk, gathering my belongings with clumsy fingers. My mother's letter still lay where I had dropped it. I bent to retrieve it, folding it carefully and pressing it to my heart. I didn't have the courage to read it yet, not after what I had done. Not after how easily I had surrendered. When I stepped into the hallway, the outside world felt too bright, too loud. I found myself wandering aimlessly through the unfamiliar penthouse floor. The place smelled of leather, coffee, and something colder, something like absence. I paused by the small kitchenette, my breath catching. The coffee machine's hum reminded me of home, of our tiny kitchen where my mother used to hum softly while waiting for the kettle to boil. "You don't need much to create a home, Lizzie," she had once said while stirring honey into my tea. "Just someone who waits for you in the morning." I blinked hard, swallowing the rising lump in my throat. No one was waiting for me now. I wrapped my arms around myself and headed toward the guest bedroom Ethan had indicated on our wedding night. I half expected to find him there, waiting with some cold remark or another command, but the room was empty, the bed untouched. I sank onto the edge, my fingers brushing the pearl buttons on my borrowed gown's hem. Every part of me ached with the weight of what I had given him, what I had allowed. I thought I'd feel empowered afterward. I thought maybe for once I had taken control, but this morning's cold emptiness told me otherwise. I didn't see him again. Until evening. I heard his voice before I saw him, low and sharp, speaking to someone on the phone. I hovered in the hallway, out of sight, listening to his measured words. No press, no announcements, no photographs. She stays out of the public eye. Do you understand? My breath caught. He was protecting me. I should have felt comforted, but all I felt was more confusion. I stepped into view just as he ended the call. He turned, surprised to see me standing there barefoot, clutching the letter to my chest like it was my only shield. He frowned, his gaze flickering to the crumpled paper in my hand. You still haven't read it? No, I whispered, my throat tightening. I'm not ready. Ethan leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms, studying me. You think reading it will change everything? I don't know, I admitted, but I'm afraid it might. We stood in silence, the air thick with unspoken words. I finally found courage to ask the question that had been gnawing at me since sunrise. Why? Did you leave? He didn't answer immediately. He pushed off the counter, walking slowly toward me until we stood just a breath apart. I didn't know if you wanted me to stay, he said quietly. Tears burned my throat. You didn't even ask. Ethan reached for me, but stopped short, his hand curling into a fist at his side. I didn't want to take more than you were willing to give. My heart stuttered. For a moment, I almost believed him. Almost. But then he looked away, his jaw tightening, and I watched the wall between us rebuild itself. I have a charity gala tomorrow night, he said, his voice returning to that cold, businesslike tone. You'll accompany me as my wife. The words felt like a slap. Why? I whispered, hurt flashing hot in my chest. So you can display me like some trophy? Prove to everyone you own me now? His eyes darkened, and for a moment I thought he might strike back, but instead he exhaled slowly, as if restraining something heavier than anger. No, he said quietly, because they need to see you beside me for your father's sake. I flinched at the mention of my father, the man who had sold me into this marriage with nothing more than a signature. The man I had tried so desperately to save. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice until it was just a breath against my skin. I won't ask again, Elizabeth. Be ready. He turned and disappeared down the hallway, leaving me standing there with nothing but my mother's letter and the echo of his command. I pressed the letter to my chest and sank to the floor, the weight of my choices crashing down on me once more. I didn't know if I had the strength to face tomorrow, but somehow I knew I would, because I was already too far gone to turn back now. The gala was already in full swing when we arrived. Dozens of glittering figures floated through the grand ballroom of the Sterling Foundation's annual charity event. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from the ceiling, casting fractured light across velvet gowns and tailored suits. Waiters moved silently among the guests, silver trays balancing champagne flutes and tiny perfect hors d'oeuvres, and I felt like I had stepped into another universe. Ethan had sent a dress to my room that afternoon, emerald green silk that fit my body with disturbing precision. I had no doubt it was selected by someone on his staff. Nothing about it felt like me. I was still fastening the tiny pearl buttons when he appeared at my door, impeccably dressed in a black tuxedo. He hadn't spoken when he saw me. He didn't need to. His eyes had swept over me, unreadable, before he offered his arm. Now here I was, paraded on his arm like the perfect accessory. The murmurs began the moment we entered. Heads turned, whispers floated like smoke through the air. I kept my chin raised the way my mother had taught me, but each step felt heavier than the last. Ethan's hand rested lightly on my back, guiding me through the crowd. His touch burned through my gown's thin silk, steady and unyielding. I wanted to shake it off, wanted to run, but I didn't, because I knew why I was here. For family. For my father. for the debt that had stolen my life before I even knew it was gone. Ethan paused near a group of men in dark suits. Investors, I guessed by the way they nodded with thin smiles and watched me with interest that made my skin crawl. Gentlemen, Ethan said smoothly, allow me to introduce my wife. Wife. The word felt like ice against my skin. I forced a smile, nodding politely. The men exchanged glances, clearly amused by how Ethan presented me like I was part of his portfolio. And then I saw her daughter Lydia stood just beyond the group. Her red dress a sharp slash of color among the sea of black and silver. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, her smile as sharp as the diamonds at her throat. I didn't need anyone to tell me who she was. I could feel it in how Ethan tensed beside me and how her eyes locked onto me like a predator sizing up prey. Ethan, she purred, stepping closer. I didn't expect to see you here with company. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his grip on my back never faltered. Lydia. She turned her gaze on me, her smile widening. And this must be the famous bride, she drawled. Tell me, dear, how does it feel to be the prize at the end of such a ruthless game? The words hit like a slap, stealing breath from my lungs. The men around us chuckled under their breath, enjoying the spectacle. Ethan's fingers dug into my back, warning me to stay quiet, but something inside me snapped. I stepped forward, out of his grip, lifting my chin until I stood toe-to-toe with the woman who had just tried to humiliate me in front of the entire room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. It feels like standing on my own 2 feet, I said softly. Something you might not understand. The air around us crackled with tension. Lydia's smile faltered for just a heartbeat before it sharpened again, but the damage was done. The men shifted uncomfortably, clearing their throats, suddenly more interested in their champagne than the confrontation. Ethan's hand caught my arm, firm but not unkind, pulling me back to his side. Excuse us, he said coldly, guiding me away without another glance at Lydia. He didn't speak again until we were tucked into a quiet corner. The party's hum a distant buzz behind us. His jaw worked as if he were holding back words too sharp, too. Release. I braced myself for the inevitable lecture, the reprimand, the punishment. But instead, he leaned in, his voice low and rough. You didn't have to do that. I swallowed hard. Yes, I did. His eyes searched mine, something flickering there, something raw and almost proud. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping slightly. You surprised me tonight, he admitted, almost to himself. I looked down, my throat tight. Why? Because I didn't behave like the silent little wife you expected? He caught my chin gently, tilting my face up to meet his gaze. Because you stood up for yourself, he murmured. I wasn't sure you still could. I didn't know what to say. The warmth in his voice felt dangerous, like standing too close to a flame I knew could burn me. We stood there, the city's lights reflecting in the windows around us. And for the first time, I wondered if there was more to Ethan Sterling than the man who had bought my silence. Before I could find courage to ask, his phone buzzed sharply in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening instantly. I reached for his hand instinctively. What is it? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked at me, really looked at me, with something like regret flickering in his eyes. We're leaving, he said quietly, guiding me toward the exit before I could press him further. But in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The ride home was silent. Ethan sat beside me in the car's back seat, his jaw clenched, his gaze fixed on the darkened city beyond the window. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, fingers tracing my mother's letter tucked inside my clutch. I had carried it with me all night, like a stone weighing down my heart. I wanted to ask about Lydia, about how his face had turned to stone when she appeared. But something told me now wasn't the time. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt longer than usual. When the doors finally opened, Ethan stepped out without waiting for me. I stood there for a moment, staring at the growing gap between us before. I followed. He poured himself something dark and expensive looking at the bar, his back turned to me. The tension in the room pressed down on my chest until I couldn't take it anymore. "Who is she?" I asked softly, his hand paused midair, the glass hovering just inches from his lips. Slowly, he set it down. "Someone who thought she could break me," he said, his voice rough and unfinished. I swallowed hard. "Did she?" He turned then, leaning back against the bar, arms crossing over his chest. "She almost did." I wanted to ask more, but my courage failed. I glanced down at my clutch, at the folded paper burning a hole in my hands. I had carried this weight long enough. "I need to know," I whispered, pulling the letter free and holding it up between us. "I need to know what she meant to you and what this means to me." Ethan's eyes darkened, but he didn't stop me. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the letter and began to read. "My dearest Elizabeth, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to hold your hand through what is coming. I wish I could spare you this, but there are truths you deserve to know. Years ago, before you were born, I worked for the Sterling family. I was a maid in their household, barely more than a girl myself. And one day, in a moment of weakness and loneliness, I fell in love with a man named Richard Sterling, Ethan's father. My breath caught. I glanced up at Ethan, but he didn't move. His jaw was tight, his eyes shuttered. I forced myself to continue reading. Our love was foolish, dangerous. When the family discovered it, they cast me out, shamed and broken. I thought I had lost everything until I found out I was carrying you. I never told him. I was too afraid. And when I heard he had married someone else, I vowed to raise you far. Away from that world, Elizabeth. I don't know what your future holds, but if you ever cross paths with the Sterlings, I pray you will remember this. You are not their property. You are not their pawn. You are my daughter, and you are stronger than any chain they try to put around your heart. Love always, Mama." My hand shook as I lowered the letter. My throat burned with 1,000 questions I couldn't form. "Tell me it's not true," I whispered, though I already knew the answer. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I've known for a long time," he admitted, his voice heavy with something I couldn't name. "I found the letters my father wrote to your mother, the ones she never answered. Tears blurred my vision." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to think this marriage was just another way to bind you to this family," he said quietly. "I thought if I kept it from you, maybe you'd have a chance to choose me for yourself." I sank onto the couch's edge, the letter crumpling in my lap. My mother had carried this secret her entire life, and now it was mine to bear. Ethan moved closer, but he didn't sit. He stood in front of me, hands curled into fists at his sides. "You're not just a debt to me, Elizabeth," he said softly. "You never were." I looked up, my heart breaking all over again. "Then what am I?" He knelt down slowly, like the truth's weight had finally brought him to his knees. "You're the only thing I've ever wanted that I didn't take by force." The words shattered. Something deep inside me. I reached out before I could stop myself, my fingers brushing the sharp line of his jaw. His eyes closed, his breath catching like the simple touch had undone him. For the first time, I saw the man behind the mask, not the ruthless CEO, not the cold stranger, but the boy who had lost his father to ambition, the man who had spent his life building walls to keep everyone out. And somehow, I found my way in. He opened his eyes, searching mine. "I know I don't deserve it," he whispered, "but I want to try with you. Tears slipped down my cheeks, but I didn't look away. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I wanted to find out with him. We didn't talk much after that night, but something had shifted between us. I could feel it in how Ethan moved around me, more hesitant, more careful, like he was afraid of pushing me too far. I didn't know how to trust him yet, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to try. It was early afternoon when the call came. I was in the small reading nook by the window, staring out at the gray sky, clutching my mother's letter like a fragile lifeline. I heard Ethan answer his phone in the next room, his voice tight and clipped. "What do you mean they showed up at his house?" My heart stopped. I stood, my pulse pounding, moving toward the door just as he stormed into the hallway, his face pale with something close to fury. "Ethan," my voice trembled. "What's happening?" He didn't answer right away, his jaw flexing, his fists curling. At his sides, "Your father," he finally said. "Someone went after him." I didn't wait for details. I grabbed my coat, my heart already racing ahead of me. "Take me to him," I whispered. When we arrived at the old house in Queens, I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the broken front door hanging off its hinges. "Dad!" I cried, running inside, my heels clattering on the worn floorboards. I found him slumped in his favorite armchair, his face bruised, his hands shaking. "Elizabeth," he rasped, trying to stand, but I was already on my knees in front of him, clutching his hands, tears burning my eyes. "Who did this?" I whispered, my voice cracking. He flinched, glancing past me. I turned to find Ethan standing in the doorway, his face like stone. "Tell her," Ethan demanded quietly. My father swallowed hard, shame flickering in his bloodshot eyes. "It was Lydia's men. She's trying to force me to sign over the last of the family property, the workshop." I felt the air leave my lungs. Ethan stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "She's not going to get away with this." My father shook his head, looking between us with something like despair. "Elizabeth, I'm so sorry. I thought I could protect you. I thought if I gave you to him, it would end." I closed my eyes, the weight of his words sinking deep into my chest. I had spent my life carrying the burden of his mistakes, his desperation, and yet here I was again, kneeling at his side, trying to pick up the pieces. Ethan crouched down beside me, his hand hovering just inches from my back, as if he didn't know if he was allowed to touch me. I turned to him slowly, searching his face. "Why are you here?" I whispered. "Why do you care?" He exhaled shakily, his blue eyes dark with something raw and unguarded. "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything," he said softly, "and I won't let it happen to you." My father's breath hitched. "I don't have anything left to give." Ethan stood, towering over us both, but his voice had never sounded more human. "You don't have to give me anything," he said quietly. "You already have the only thing I've ever wanted." I felt my throat close. Ethan turned to me, his hand finally settling on my shoulder, steady and warm. "She's not yours to bargain with anymore," he whispered, his voice shaking ever so slightly. "She never was." I broke then, collapsing into my father's arms, clutching him like the little girl I used to be. He held me tight, sobbing into my hair, whispering apology after apology. Ethan knelt again, his hand brushing my back with gentleness that undid me. I turned toward him, tears streaming down my face. "What do we do now?" He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time I didn't see the walls. I didn't see the distance. I saw a man willing to burn down his empire to protect something he had never believed he deserved. He stood slowly, reaching down to help me to my feet. "We fight," he whispered, and I knew without a shadow of doubt he meant it. The next few days passed in a blur of hushed phone calls, closed-door meetings, and whispers of legal threats that never made it to court. Ethan was everywhere, his presence, like a wall between us and the storm Lydia had unleashed, and yet he never once asked me to stay by his side. He gave me space, too much space, until one night I couldn't bear it anymore. I found him in his study, standing by the window, staring out at the city like he was searching for something he couldn't find. I stood in the doorway, clutching the frame with trembling fingers. "You've been quiet," I whispered. He didn't turn right away. There's nothing left to say. I stepped inside, closing the door softly behind me. "I don't believe that," I said, my voice shaking. "Not after everything we've been through." He let out a breath, sharp and heavy, and turned to face me. "You think this is over?" I swallowed hard. "I don't know. Is it?" His jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists at his sides. I thought if I took control, if I forced this marriage, I could finally take back what my father lost. I felt my throat tighten. "And did you?" He laughed bitterly, the sound low and raw. "I don't know anymore." I took a hesitant step closer. "Then what do you know?" He looked at me, really looked at me, like the mask he had worn for so long was cracking under the weight of everything he couldn't say. "I know I don't want to be that man anymore," he whispered. "I'm tired of fighting." Ghosts. My breath caught. He moved toward me slowly, like he was afraid I might run. I've spent my whole life trying to prove I was stronger than him, colder than him, but all I ever did was become the thing I hated most. His voice broke just a little, and my heart shattered with it. I reached for him, my hands shaking as I cupped his face, forcing him to look at me. "You're not him, Ethan," I whispered. "You never were." His hands caught my waist, his grip desperate, like he needed something to hold on to. "I don't know how to let this go," he rasped. "I don't know how to—" "Stop." I pressed my forehead to his, closing my eyes as the truth poured out of me. "Then let me help you." He let out a shaky breath, his arms pulling me tighter against him, like he was afraid I'd slip through his fingers. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Not because you have to, but because you want to." Tears spilled down my cheeks, and for the first time, they didn't burn. "I'm here," I breathed. "I've always been here." He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes, his thumb brushing away the tears on my cheek. "Elizabeth," he whispered, his voice breaking on my name. "I'm yours if you'll have me." I couldn't speak. I could only nod, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. He leaned in, pressing his lips to mine, not like before, not claiming or taking, but giving, offering. When he pulled away, his eyes searched mine with something I had never